Welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'm your host, Kojo Bafum, and this podcast is an extension of my book, also called Listen to Your Footsteps, which is a collection of essays, reflections, and poetry on things like fatherhood, identity and belonging, growing up, creativity, and the lessons learned. The purpose of this podcast is to gain insight and learn from the journeys that others have taken. I explore the worlds of art, culture, design, business, creativity, and life from the perspective of Africans who are contributing to the redefinition of the continent and who we are. My guest for this episode is very simply a storyteller who tells stories primarily through the medium of photography. His name is Leroy Jason. Leroy, what up?
Yo!
That's as quick an intro as you can get, right?
That's a good intro. Something short and sweet. Knowing myself as a storyteller is very important because part of what I do as a photographer is not only document, people and people's behavior. And archive is very much parcel of what I'm about. A lot of photographers are in for the instant fame and fortune, but a lot of them forget about the idea of building a credible archive that would serve for the generations that are to come, not for the ones that already exist right now.
But it's kind of like we attach a lot of importance to, let's call it the label or the title. I always tell people one of the hardest questions for me to answer is, what do you do? Because when people ask you what you do, the assumption is let's call it a job title, right? And when I look at your work and when I look at your trajectory, yes, you do photography, you make photographs, but it has always felt so much more than that, which is why I think this idea of storyteller for me fits. It feels like it fits more for me personally, but it feels like it fits perfectly for you.
No, it does. Why I say this is because obviously I was birthed in a home where a very big photographer existed, and I also ran away from the idea of living in my father's shadow for many years. And in order for me to come to terms with what it is that I do, because photography was birthed in anthropology. Out of all the disciplines that was birthed in, it was very significant that was birthed in this institution, because the usage of your camera, or the usage of the idea of documenting people and their stories, started coming around in that kind of space and understanding. The more I knew that, the more I tried to use my photography to help. So initially, when I started photography, it was there to change people's perceptions of themselves. That's why a lot of my portraits, I'm always more engaged with how my subject reacts versus what I'm doing it for. It's very important for me to show a version of yourself that you've never seen before, and that the most honest that is. I feel like more people can relate to that. And then obviously it set me on this journey of trying to find incredible stories. I once did a series of work on like 100-year-old people in South Africa.
Wow.
And trying to find the understanding and the meaning to living a fulfilled life. You would think that, and which is true, sometimes sitting sitting next to your grandmother, even if she's not saying anything, but their wisdom just feels like it just gets poured onto you. Was the type of effect that I was looking for when going searching city to city for 100-year-old people. And also just listening to their stories of what a fulfilled life is like, or a happy life is like, or the secret to living a long life is like. And those are the things that you uncover in this journey while working in your career as a photographer.
I mean, you've mentioned that you grew up in a house, or you grew up under a photographer. and a well-respected and acknowledged photographer. But did you always want to be a photographer?
Funny enough, no. So I wanted to be a cop, but because my father was always getting abused with being a cop in apartheid was not really seen as a profession that a lot of other black photographers wanted. I mean, like so Alf Kumala. I mean, my father was harassed by cops constantly, arrested. There was a story once where he was arrested with Bishop Tutu, and they beat him and Bishop Tutu up. So when I said I wanted to be a cop, the first thing he was infuriated by that, almost like because it's post-traumatic stress, right?
Yeah.
And he brought a lot of that back into the household, and that's why I was always very afraid of going into hardcore journalism, because I was scared of those effects coming back into the household. So that's why I kind of chose also the commercial direction, because of two reasons. One, of the harshness of like working condition. The second one was because black photographers at that time could never be commercial photographers. As much as they had possessed all the skills and knowledge about how to capture them, they were always forced into two different fields, art or journalism. And if you weren't making money as an artist, then you would obviously be sustained, or be, your art will be sustained in the journalistic field. And so obviously I used a lot of like old photographers, and I used that aesthetic to bring into the commercial space.
At what point did you then decide actually you're going to go into what is essentially the family business? I mean, so you go from cop. Where did you grow up actually?
So I grew up in Cape Town, in a small town called Montana.
Okay.
This was built based on the displacement of people of District 6. So all the people most of the people who got moved out of District 6 lived in, or got moved to Montana. So what happened was, it's a really funny story. So I left Cape Town in pursuit of this like new idea of self. And then I went to Pretoria to study marketing for a bit. I didn't finish it there. Then I went to Parktown College to try and finish it there. Then I couldn't. And then I got catapulted into like obviously the work or trying to work, because obviously I wouldn't have money to pay for my education. So what I did was I just picked up a job and I started working like every other South African. The first job space that most South Africans go into is the call center space, which later on became one of my biggest advantages, because now I can sell myself on the floor. But at the time I thought it was useless. And then I got into a bit of, when I got strong into marketing, I opened an advertising agency, a mobile advertising agency with my cousin and Chaba. And these were obviously assisted by people who owned Herd Boys, and they put us into the refinery. They were our first investors. And we started this company, but we didn't have any customers.
Okay, wait. So let me stop you there. How do you go, like you've done a jump from call center to all of a sudden owning your own agency?
Yeah, because I mean, that's exactly what happened. I worked at the call center, and I started finding myself going up in the rank, in the sense that we started doing a lot of marketing, searching for clients for the actual call center itself. And then I just got into dealing directly with clients. And then I was like, look, I can easily do this. I'm 26 years old. The world feels like it's in the palm of my hands, and jumping from this career to the next would be an easy thing. Lo and behold, it wasn't. I mean, we went through moments of such long periods of brokenness that I was forced to use photography to keep my partners at least eating. during this time. So I'll be working at clubs. The famous bank club, Kristen hired me to be the resident photographer there. At the time, there was only thunder.com photography, which is like these little cell phone photographs. I mean, I've been shooting DSLR cameras since the age of 16. I was the youngest photographer in Soweto and doing Backpage Babes at the age of 16. So I was like, in Cape Town, that's what I was known for. Meeting beautiful women and then taking them to the beach and then taking photos of them. I'm 16. I'm taking like 22-year-olds, 23-year-olds. So obviously my social life was like up there. I was supplying stock off to a lot of old guys, and because of that, they let me into a lot of the boys' club. It's unfortunate that superpower has died. A lot of guys come to me and ask me if that I still have these powers, but you know, after 2 kids, those powers tend to disappear by force. So
and I suspect at the same time, because I mean we've interacted a couple of times, and I don't know if you find this, but as we grow older and we mature, we start to look back on some of the things that we did and some of the thinking, and that in itself is one starts to recognize what was problematic and what wasn't, right?
This is true. But I mean, you know, being young comes with the idea that you don't necessarily have to make all the mature decisions. The problem is when you want to be young forever, you know, and never make mature decisions and have no sense of what's the term? You know, good decision making or cognitive or emotive decision making. So I was saying that. So then I started doing photography at clubs, but then I practiced like lighting and it was more about. And people enjoyed my photography because it wasn't just about the lighting experience, but also people felt like their new profile pictures were discovered in that moment. It was the birth of social media, and things like profile pictures became like the highlight of what I did. Even though I also took that study of people and how they interact with social media into my business. So it made sense. It's just that I couldn't sustain that part of my working career because I felt like I needed to make a decision because I wasn't making meetings anymore. I wasn't showing up on Mondays at work because I would be exhausted from the weekend. Then I fully decided to let go of that one business and leave it to my cousin and my other business partner to run with. And then I went submerged myself fully into photography. But then I had to make the conscious decision, if I'm going to do this, what am I going to do? So what I did was for my first big check from SABC, I traveled to the Philippines and I lived there for 2 years. It was a hard decision to make because I wasn't making any money, but luckily I was seeing a person that was looking after me at that point in time, and I was just making decisions purely based on my heart and what I wanted for myself. But while I was out there, I realized that my work in South Africa is where Africa is where my focus should lie. There's so much that needs to be done, and when I say done, I don't mean documenting, but the idea that I'm going to use photography to help social ills, help individuals see themselves as God, see themselves as something that is way greater than the natural lighting aesthetic that they've always chosen for Africans and the African aesthetic. Trying to change the narrative of that completely by using one individual at a time. Whilst going through this journey, I then realized that the actual equipment wasn't enough. So I needed to use lighting. And that's how I ended up in that commercial space.
I mean, how do you find that balance? Because one of the things that I wanted to highlight and one of the things that always comes through with your work if you look at the, let's call it the full spectrum of it, right? As opposed to just a snapshot. Is your relationship with, let's call it, people or communities who feel like they live on the edges and not necessarily marginalized, but yeah, I guess marginalized also works as a word. But, you know, there's people who are not necessarily in the mainstream and are struggling to be heard and be seen. And you seem to have a way of sharing them and allowing them to share of themselves that is very different from, you know, it's one thing if I go in and let's say I'm giving a voice and I'm attempting to give a voice to a particular community, but I'm not part of that community. With you, it always feels like you're part of it. I mean, like with Fees Must Fall, you weren't a student, but you were documenting it and you were sharing in a way that made it feel like you were a student and you were part of that community.
Yeah, that's the part of my journalism that you know, when I was fortunate, like I said, to have grown up in the house of photographer, but also having full access to other homes of like very famous photographers. So sitting in their lounges, going through their references, going through their archives, but you know, by chance because my father's come to visit them, or listening to how they go about documenting things, and then practicing it when my father goes. You know, I remember once my dad took me to my first real emotionally like charged environment that I've ever been in. Was at the age of 12. My dad took me to a pig farm out in Ottery, and the farmer had obviously made his laborers live like pigs as well. Like, it was disgusting beyond anything. Like, people living in like a 4-bedroom house, but there's 12 or 18 people living in that space. You know, all of them still covered in like feces or like whatever it is that they feed the pigs. But that smell and that stench, and they weren't even paying them. So they were paying them on the DOP system. So I imagine. So he was documenting this DOP system, and I was meant to go inside of these dark alleys, these dark houses, trying to photograph and make portraits of the people that live in there. I couldn't do it. I remember just standing outside of the house and just asking myself, how does my father do this every day? You know, and part and parcel of the trick of capturing or documenting people's existence is to make sure that you are a part of understanding their struggles, respecting the subject is usually how the narrative usually starts. It comes with a lot of respect, comes with a lot of understanding, or not even understanding, but submerging oneself into that without being judgmental, being completely objective. And then fast forward to that, to like a very violent space, which was Eugene de Blanche's funeral. And I was like late, like mid 20s when that happened. And I went there with my father. I remember it was the first time I actually been in a violent space, you know, and how to deal with that. That gave me preparation for what I was going to experience at Wits. You know, it was the reason why I went out to document it was because I just kept on seeing the narrative that media was pumping versus what I kept hearing on the ground. Then I decided, look, let me go and try this out. And then I got fixated with it. Then I spent 7 weeks, week after week, not getting paid like all the other journalists. Like, it was literally, I lost, I think, about 8 jobs whilst on that, in the field, trying to document this every day and posting it online, which is great because I gave people the ability to see how things escalated instead of it just being a sensationalized experience. It was actually I posted exactly how the day progressed. And because of that, it gave me the opportunity to work for a political party. But I did that because I worked with the EFF because I really want to change the narrative and bring the human element into a lot of the subject matters that I work on is always to bring the human element into it. I don't involve myself in politics, but I involve myself in what it takes for people to recognize each other. Seeing God in others helps clarity and decision making a bit better amongst ourselves, introspectively, interpersonal decision making happens around me, and that's why my body of work was centered around that, on everything that's for. But that was a part of me which I still take with me in all the other work that I do commercially. And I think one thing that I enjoy right now is that like big organizations see that my agenda still stands, and that's bringing the human element into everything that I do. And if people use that to sell cars, then so be it. But at least the archive is still not compromised.
And the thread is the thread and the positioning is consistent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you talk about your father quite a bit in terms of the influence. What has it been like now? Kind of going, okay, you're fully in the family business, in inverted commas, and I say this because I worked for my father from 12 till I was like 28, 29, and it makes for interesting dynamics, and we lived in the same house, at the same time. So like our bedrooms were opposite each other, and then we'd get into our cars and drive to the office, and our offices were next to each other.
Yo. And then did he trust you with decision making?
Yeah, no, like absolutely. So that part wasn't the struggle. I'd say the struggle was just kind of finding a balance between, let's call it between work and home. Because I grew up working with him from a business perspective, from a process perspective, from a decision-making perspective, that wasn't a hassle. It was more a hassle when, for example, I want to hit the streets on a Saturday night and he wants to hang out. Or one of my, which I write about in my book, like one of my realizations was my moving to Joburg was one of the biggest disappointments for him because I was groomed to take over the family businesses. But at the same time, eventually it was great for our relationship because we eventually reached a point where we could have conversations that were not about business solely. Because before that, business and work consumed all of our lives. Therefore, even our conversations tended to be focused around business. Whereas in my leaving home and then settling in Joburg and eventually kind of getting married and having kids, we could get on the phone and talk about other stuff.
It sounds like there's definitely a common thread with me as well. But I mean, it's a bit harder now because obviously the dynamics have changed in the industry for Black people. Now, more Black photographers or content creators are needed and celebrated. It's frustrating that some of the older photographers that have kind of created this platform for us and given us the ability and confidence in the way in which we shoot that. Because corporates don't want to celebrate them; they want to kind of celebrate these new ones, And I get that. But a lot of young photographers, and I've noticed, are very displaced because of that. Like they tend to not really find their own voice because a lot of the idols that they idolize or being taught about how to take photographs or make photographs have all been either European or like a Western way of thinking, and a lot of their aesthetic leans towards that, and they seem, a lot of South African ones, very displaced, you know. But with my dad being a photographer, sometimes it's a bit frustrating because I would want so much more from him, you know. But I forget that he's also just an artist, and he's also disgruntled, and he's also gone through so much to get where he is that I tend to forget that part, you know. But I'm also very happy that because there's always been this ongoing debate about being the type of photographer that buys their own equipment and those who like rent equipment. And the thing is, a lot of Black photographers are always meant to believe that they need to buy their own equipment in order for them to say that they are a photographer. But if you find a lot of progressive photographers rent a lot of their gear because it gives them the ability to work on different cameras, different gear constantly. Because, you know, when you buy something, then you're kind of stuck to use a Nikon.
Yeah.
And that's it. Whereas when you renting gear, then you have the ability to jump from Nikon, Canon. You can try out, a Phase 1, which is a medium format camera that you probably wouldn't be able to afford. It's there at a fraction of the price, you know. So there's this. The times have changed, you know, and there's different ways to kind of get to the business aspect of photography, because a lot of white photographers who have got given the privilege of making money in those times prior to, you know, the abolishment of apartheid and the way media works, a lot of them had private, you know, went to private schools or sent their kids to private schools off of photography. You can make a shitload of money. Sorry for my language. You can make a large amount of money from photography. It's just that how you go about doing it is where the tricky balance is, you know. And that argument with my father will always be back and forth. You know? You know, it's the old school way versus the new school way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, generations, like every generation thinks that the next one is messing up, right? And every generation feels like the one before it doesn't quite get it. But I think you highlighted a very interesting point there around this idea of ownership, because I've been having the conversation amongst friends when it comes to property. Because it feels like within a South African context, there's this drive to, you know, own property, like own your own house. And the conversation I was having with someone was, because I grew up in Lesotho, we owned our own place. And it's not it wasn't a thing to go and buy a house or to build a house. Whereas it's important to recognize from a South African context that because Black people were denied ownership for so long, it's become, you know, it's become one of the milestones. And it was interesting in having this conversation because I was like, I don't have that. It's, you know, like I rent where I stay, and I've been renting for a while. And it's like, well, I do that because that's where I am. But at the same time, in contemplating, because we're living in such a connected world, and contemplating perhaps even moving eventually, it's like, well, if I own a place, that actually holds me down. So I thought it was very interesting when you talk about like that, the ownership of equipment and how that actually to a certain extent boxes you.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. But I mean, this property conversation is something that my cousin and I also have, because I believe in owning. Nothing will. Initially, before I owned property, I was like, I need to make a decision if I'm going to be in South Africa. Then I will be able to like put my energy into owning that property. But the thing is, once you buy property, you can do whatever you want. You can rent it out and you can allow it to mature on its own. There's so many things that can go into that. But you're right. There's this constant debate about ownership and where should your interests lie. I think when it comes to our type of careers, because we don't have retirement packages that when we're done working, then we have to really invest our money in different things, assets, artwork, and things that will appreciate over time, because sooner or later we won't be able to run around or do the things that we need to. Lockdown taught us that like another epidemic can also come and your career could be on pause for so long. Now, I saw a lot of people have their fourth, fifth property sold at that point in time to kind of give them a bit of an income or a better surety that their lifestyle won't change too drastically. But when it comes to ownership in photography, there's two different spaces that you definitely need to always keep your eye on. Is your archives, and your archives is one of the biggest things. I mean, that if you're doing things right now and you don't realize that 20 years from now, this documentation that you're doing would amount to anything, then you are sorely you're not going to respect the stuff that you've been doing, and you're looking for that instant gratification. But number two is also that other people will flourish, and then you end up going out like most other African artists in our country, where it's like going out as a pauper, and those are the things that I really, it keeps me up at night. It's like, how do I place myself in positions where those things aren't going to happen? And so ownership into property, ownership into my gear, the type of gear, because I keep a lean like package of gear, because I'll just go for like a couple of location kits, just so that I can just kind of move around when I need to. I don't want to be tied down by any studio or that's something I could never do. It's like renting out studio space. I did that once. That thing is horrible if it's not managed correctly.
Yeah.
I only saw in Ghana when I just come back from Ghana is that the photography space is a different business entity altogether. If people own and rent a studio, a lot of people always think that their money would lie in advertising, and they're trying to push that. But there's a bubble or a little, what do they call those? Like little pocket of cash on like personal photography, from graduation to people to weddings, weddings to like personal portraits, family portraits, those sort of things. That there's a lot of money in there. It takes a lot of work and a lot of manpower, but there is a lot of money in that space. I remember before I went into commercial, that was the only space I kind of made money. And I mean, I was making 40,000 a month. That is what I took home as profit after all of the things I needed to pay off. But at the time, I wasn't paying tax as well. But now I am. So I will put that on record that I've got a very strict policy on paying tax. But before that, I mean, I was walking easily away with 40,000, 50,000 rand a month, guaranteed. So with that said, it depends on how you want to play this game. From a photography point of view, how you'd want to sit, but you also remember that the value of your images now versus the value of your images 20 years from now is two different things. Because I play for the long game. I'm here. I'm here to document things and do what I'm doing purely to survive the long game. Because I see how my father operates sometimes. If he's broke and he's got Nelson Mandela kissing a Beyonce image that was sold for 50 to 60,000 USDs. You know what I mean? So, and then you don't have any money. I mean, I have that sometimes where I don't have work for about a month or two, and then I'll get a phone call from someone saying, look, they want to go through my archives and see if they can buy images, and they buy like 15 images, 60,000 Rand. Then, all my problems just disappear.
Yeah.
So it's also very important to create an archive that will translate later on in years. So when I do like I do family portraits sometimes even for free, purely based on the idea that one, I'm going to train myself to photograph family portraits for a commercial at some point, and pull up some of the references and some of the work that I've done already. And secondly is if someone pulls out an archive they see these family portraits or individual portraits and go, look, can I buy that? I call that family up immediately and say, listen, you weren't thinking about this, but here's an extra
opportunity
that's coming in your direction. If you agree and seeing yourself on a Sanlam ad next week. But that is also ways in which that this business can be sustainable. I've got a very strict thing that I wake up every day and I say to myself, every day if a photograph is needed, and if I'm not there to take that photograph, then I'm sleeping on myself.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a podcast in which I chat to Africans from a cross-section of society and sectors, including art, culture, design, business, and creativity, to name a few. I delve into their journeys, the decisions they've taken to get to where they are, how they do what they do, and everything in between. Essentially, we go wherever the conversation takes us. So what's your day like? I mean...
What's my day like?
Yeah.
My days are usually... because how Joburg is. Joburg is a different type of beast. If you miss emails on a Monday and your to-do list on a Monday, you try and sleep on a Tuesday, and I hope that you can probably do it on Wednesday, Thursday. By Wednesday you have to already call your week done because you've missed that first 2 days, right? So my Mondays are very admin based. I'm usually calling up, texting people, looking at references and thinking about what I can photograph next, and maybe use that as leverage to either get into good books of a organization or see if I can assist an organization grow like the one that I'm working on now currently, which is Saibono. It's seeing opportunities where photography is needed and how I can use that to leverage either my projects going forward or just purely based on giving. Because I also believe in karmic energy. In order for you to get what you manifest, part of that is giving of yourself. So my days usually start off with a strong meditation at 6 o'clock in the morning, then gym, because I believe in different ways to communicate with God, because sometimes you can be in the very calm, meditative state. But if you also set intentions when your heart rate is like really pumped up to like 126, beats, or 180. Like if you keep that going for like an hour, and your conversation with God is different, even your aesthetic or your perception of the day is completely controlled. Then I go into admin, a lot of phone calls, a lot of calls, a lot of texting. Social media is also a very big part of my business because I didn't have a website until today. Actually, yesterday was the first day of the beginning of this website that I've been building. So social media usually is a big part of it. So I have to be posting online, trying to use images, because Instagram has given us such a great platform for photographers to kind of sell themselves. As much as people use it to flaunt and floss their lifestyle, but for photographers, if it wasn't for this thing, honestly, it would be so hard going door to door looking for opportunities to take photos. So that's kind of what my day's like. And because I'm single now, so I'm only, occasionally looking for dates.
Occasionally. You seem to be out all the time anyway, man. Like you're saying, Instagram gives us glimpses into people's lives, but it's also partly illusionary, because when we follow you, it looks like every weekend you're throwing parties with Akio and you're taking pictures of people.
Yeah, no. I definitely don't throw any parties with Akio. I mean, those guys did me wrong there with that Strictly Soul thing. But photography is the space I kind of hide behind. If you catch me out without my camera, chances are I'm very much more introverted. Photography, it forces me to kind of like speak to people, which I enjoy doing. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of it is also draining in energy wise, emotionally. You really have to sometimes be selfless and not think about what you're going through when you're dealing with that, right?
See, this is why I'm a writer. I don't have to go. I don't have to go talk to people.
Hey, and that's the great thing about. I mean, well, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because one side is great to cut with, and then sometimes it cuts into you,
Yeah, no doubt.
But I'm sure that there are moments where it's important to interact with people in order for you, like people watch. Because I mean, you writers sit and people watch for days. I'm sure like the ideas of what people's conversations are like versus what they actually are doing is way more entertaining in your head than the reality. But when it comes to my socializing, I'm actually really bad. I spend most of my time at the crib more than anything. If I can avoid going out, trust me, I do.
And family? I mean, we've talked about your father quite a bit, but I also realized that you have a certain relationship with your mother. What was her influence on this journey as you're going down the same path as, the next version of the path that your father laid?
So if it wasn't for my mom, I don't think that I would have seen photography as a business. I would have been a barefoot artist, trying to just document what I think is important. And that's it. And there's no commercial aspect to it. If it wasn't for my mom, I don't think I would have traveled as much as I have because of the opportunities that they were created. Because of my mom, I actually started. That's where I did marketing. I had no clue about marketing at the time, and my mom forced me into it. She said, "Look, if I'm going to pay for any sort of education, I'm not going to pay for photography. That's for damn sure. What I am going to do is I'm going to put you into marketing and see whether or not it's something for you." And because of that, and many other things that I thought that she was being horrible to me for, but actually just giving me a lot of backbone and thick skin in order for me to be persistent in my dreams of living a soft life, because obviously my mom had to deal with the artist side of my dad, and she vowed to herself, never ever is she ever going to go in that route again. So she didn't. She ended up. Her next relationship was a guy that really gave me the perspective that I currently have about how to recognize opportunities and create something out of that. His name was Bonani Keswa, and he started Sowetan. No, not Sowetan. He started Sunday World. And watching him create this publication was probably the most privileged opportunity I've ever really got to see how someone can start something from ground up, and be as successful and sustainable as it is till today.
How's that molded you as a father? Because you're also a father, right?
Yeah. No, one thing that it's molded me in the sense that there's a possibility to have great balance between a career and a family life, because I was always meant to believe that I would have to sacrifice, which I did in the past. I mean, I taken a lot of opportunities, and that was at the detriment to my relationships, and I knew that this wasn't really what I wanted for myself. It was something that I can't continue doing. It wasn't sustaining my social and my emotional point, my emotional state of being, because having family and being a part of a family is very important, and choosing your career over that is sometimes it feels like it's a great opportunity then and there, but then later on you're filled with a lot of regret, in the sense that you missed out on opportunity, and some people become resentful to you for that. But I think communication and being open and timing things correctly is what I got taught from that old man. Yeah,
what's your relationship like with your kids?
He's single now.
No.
My dad's single. He's he believes, he always tells me, you must be like a white photographer. White photographers, they don't care about relationships. They don't care about, this was the misconception and the conditioning I was taught, The white photographers didn't care about relationships. They didn't care about, going on an assignment and looking for a vagina. They would be, the only black photographers do that. As soon as they land in PE, the first thing that they want to do is start calling which woman that they know, to make their stay comfortable. But white photographers, all they ever do is just work, pump out work from, and that's the sacrifice they're willing to make for their craft.
Look with that. I mean, I am of a slightly different view, in terms of the level of sacrifice for your art or for your career or for your work. But I am curious in terms of, because your parents were both very influential in your life. I mean, and you get it when you when one talks to you and interacts with you. Each in their own way has kind of helped you come into yourself and become yourself, right? And now, like you're saying, you're single, but you have children. How have you been navigating that then, in terms of hopefully being, having the same type of role in your children's lives?
So navigating that is very, very difficult, because I've been denied, obviously, the opportunity to raise my son correctly on my own. Even though I've showed all the capabilities of having the means to make that possible. For males in this country, it's really hard for them to have the type of support that most females have when having kids. I hate the idea of gender conforming or gender roles, but sometimes there are things that we just can't run away from. Like struggles that some men have to go through in order for them to raise their kids the way in which they would hope for. So it is very difficult for me to come to terms with what that is, especially given our current state of our South African climate, where males are doing quite hectic things, and having to first sort that out before we can start talking about men's rights, because or fathers' rights in this case. It's a very contentious conversation.
Yeah.
Because as much as people could agree to it, but then when it comes to the practicality or the practice of it, then it becomes a different conversation. So it's also forced me to kind of sometimes be disgruntled in the sense that I want to go and hide in my corner and just work and forget about everything else. But I know that there's other ways to deal with it. There's, patience and kindness does serve you well in the long run. It's just that sometimes you want to see results immediately, But being there for my son is one of the most important things that I put high on my priorities. But I also understand that children also go through moments where they realize that their parents had to go out and fend and do things in order for them to be who they are. There's also the part where I understand and I'm also appreciative of when my mom giving me the opportunity, even though I fought with her for a very long time to get my son. But now I see this as more of an opportunity to create the type of wealth and the type of comfortability that I need for a sustainable upbringing for him, which is cool. I mean, whereas I grew up with my father, and I had to start working at the age of 15. I started working at Sowetan and Akajo to look for constant or an income that will just kind of keep the lights on, But it was fun though. It was also great knowing that I'm contributing to the fact that we can live in a house together. I was raised by my dad and looked after, went to school, got taught everything that I knew while still being there. So I feel very possessive of the idea that I wanted to do the same thing with my son. But I think just given the circumstance and what others think is important in raising a child, it seems like, and that's why my resentment, or not resentment is a harsh word, but like I'm perturbed by the idea that women in males' lives are the only real decision makers when it comes to raising children. Like mothers, grandmothers, aunts, everyone will have their opinion on how to do that. But I think maybe historically, because of men's positions and how they grew up raising, some of them don't even be involved in their children's lives at all. But like that history of how males are being undermined in the sense that they can't contribute equally, or if not more, equally or at the same level as a woman at that point.
I think it's tied to what you talked about. Also there's just the kind of, let's call it the current and past landscape or climate in this country, where unfortunately what you have is that you have some men falling between the cracks because it's overwhelmingly one way. Those who are positive and are coming at it differently, it becomes very, very difficult. I mean, like I grew up in Lesotho and I was raised by my father. And so I remember when I first had kids, and I think I write about this, and I've talked about it quite a bit, where people would say, what do you have to say to absent fathers in South Africa? And I'm like, I don't know what to say to them because it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't compute. It's like a total different paradigm from my thinking, my upbringing, my perspectives on life. Because it's kind of like I always wanted children, and I have children, and part of my job is to raise my children. And it's, that's how I was raised. And my father were 5 kids, and we generally were all raised by my father. So it's like, okay, yes, there's an important role that both parents play. But a father can also raise a child. And that's what I was raised with. So even the idea that you can have a child and not care and just decide that actually this doesn't work for me and go about your life. Like, it's like the old computer getting fried because it's trying to process a problem that is beyond it. And that's kind of how I approach it. So it's like, and that's the sad, I guess the sad tragedy is that there'll be the minority. There'll be the minority who therefore have to suffer for it. But if we look at the other side, which is, that's the original pandemic in this country, right? Violence against women in particular is for me the kind of, I guess, the original pandemic in South Africa. And it can't be, when you're talking, it can't be easy being you, because you have a level of awareness and sensitivity and emotional intelligence that a lot of men don't have. And you interact with spaces with people who are firsthand dealing with all of this stuff. And then at the same time, you also kind of have to deal with your own, with your own challenges and make sense of that, being sometimes aware of even the optics. So I was just listening to you. I was listening to you talk, and it's like you're trying to find your words because you're also aware of the landscape that we're within.
That's so true. And you're right, it is. And it's hard when you know that the latter exists, and, you've been into other societies where these things exist. And it's frustrating when you can see how to join the dots, but those dots just don't want to join at all. There's a level of understanding that it's just missing. And you don't know how to bridge that gap. But the only way to do it is just be sensitive and be patient, right? And hope that with whatever you are doing, that that 1% becomes, or your action and your behavior becomes what is the new norm.
Yeah, my man. Thank you very much.
Interesting. Cool.
And yeah, keep on keeping on, man. You, like I said, I've kind of followed, I guess I've followed you, I've followed your career, I've followed your trajectory over the years. And
so much. And you've always been speaking about this for years, but I never really took you serious. I'm not gonna lie. When you say that, you're always like, I'm always like, Koyo's got so many important things on his mind. What's that? Where would he have time on social media to do these things?
Dude, I sit in my little corner, and the older I become, the more of a hermit I become. So, but thank you very much, man.
No, thank you for this opportunity. I really wish that not only how you recognize others, that others constantly recognize the work that you are doing. It's, and these are the type of archives that I love. I love seeing and being a part of, because I know that it truly will speak to a group of audience that will continuously grow emotionally, mentally, and physically. But people look back at things like the stuff that you are doing as super important, and you need to keep doing that. Not for that purpose, but to follow your own.
Yeah. Thanks, bro.
My pleasure.
Have a good weekend. All right.
Cool.
Bye.
Have a great one. Bye.
The Listen to Your Footsteps podcast is produced by Zebra Culture. If you have ideas of what we can do better, people you'd like us to have a conversation with, or would just like to share a thought, you can email me on info@zebraculture.com. To check out past episodes, go to kojabuffer.com/podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, Listen to Your Footsteps, check out kojabuffer.com/book. There are details on the various spaces it's available at. I'd also appreciate it if you could leave a review or comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Finally, there's the Zebra Culture by Koja Buffer newsletter, where on a weekly basis, I share a curated list of articles, playlists, videos, etc. that have caught my attention. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.